sending an email real quick.
Hello.
He's here.
So I think, let folks come on. Hey, Gina.
In the car.
Yeah. Hey, y'all.
Car.
Hi, Cece.
Who else here?
Greetings, everybody.
Y'all all look amazing, but Portia, you look great.
Hi, Cece. I miss you, man.
I know where you been at.
In California or in Mexico.
I know.
Oh yeah, I saw it.
Far away from you.
Yes.
We don't have conferences and stuff no more. This is so whack, man.
I really felt that this year. Like I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
I ain't seen no advocates in person. Hey, Maria.
Hi, Maria.
Okay. All right.
I know. I had to look for a photo yesterday for this thing I was writing, and I had to look in all these old conference photos, like USCA and Speak Up Summit, and I was all, remember we
We're supposed to be Puerto Rico.
I know we were supposed to be in Puerto Rico for the United States Conference on HIV.
Man, I was excited about that. And then freaking Florida, what is it? Where were we gonna go? Destin.
Oh yeah, it's a positive living. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
no.
Oh no, for WRI. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Both in the Panhandle. Yeah.
No, it's definitely. It is. I mean, there was a point where like some of the travel is getting to be a little too much, but now that we're kind of on the flip side of it, there's definitely an argument to be made of missing. Well, just seeing people. Yeah. I mean, who's talking about that? I tuned into a session yesterday for a little bit. It was really good. And people were talking about just like not being able to hug each other, and especially at like USCA, all that.
Yeah.
So
Krista, I think we ran into each other like on at the Iris house the other day online.
I know. Did I text you?
No.
I texted you, but I
that was so crazy.
I saw your name and I was like, Elsie, look, I didn't finish the text. It's a draft. I said I didn't realize you were presenting, and then I'm like waving hi, but I didn't send it.
Virtual conferences are something to be adjusted to, like breakout rooms and Zoom calls.
That first breakout was a little bit like they were just like name by name and trying to reassign everyone. It was a little bonkers, but yeah, we made it. I know. That's so awesome, because I actually saw that you had put in an abstract, but then I knew they were going back to ask you guys a question about it or something, and then I didn't hear after that, so I'm glad. Did it go all right?
Yeah, it went. I got kicked out and nobody would let me back in, so I missed most of it, but we did it.
Oh, yeah. Ours, because, since I was working with a couple of the New York crews, so Kim Kennedy and Evelyn, one of the bloggers, joined us, so that was cool. So it was good. All right. Well, people are still logging on, but hey, Mom. My mom, she's down on camera. Hey, Juliana. So I think we'll just kind of start, as people log in, we'll start our welcome. And it's kind of sad that this is, our last session for now. We started this, as many of you know, back in April as a kind of pivot to try and bring people together after the quarantine and the shutdown across the country, and not only bring people together on a regular basis every 2 weeks, but also to try and focus our energy on something kind of positive or around self-care or something to help us cope, a coping mechanism during all of the, a lot of this pandemic. And so as we've been doing this, it's been amazing. We've had such a great number of presentations by so many various members of our community from, there's Mel, she's logging on from the UK. We had Bose in Nigeria. We've had people all over the country presenting on completely different topics. But we've also noticed that people, obviously are going back to work, and there's, maybe less time for people to gather. So as much as this has been awesome, for now we're going to put a pause on it. If, hopefully we don't have to go back into any type of major shutdown. But if for some reason it seems like we should pull this back up at another time, we will. So, but for now we are going to, there's Sonia. And on a very positive note, with our amazing presenter today, Maya Feller, who will be introducing herself and talk a little bit more about who she is and what she does. But this was inspired by our session with Portia, who was doing, a session around some do-it-yourself masks, and in that session we started talking a little bit about some of the, a thing that she was trying, a 30-day nutrition challenge. And so that started there was just some conversations around nutrition and different types of things, and we thought it would be great to have a professional come and speak to us about this, because especially right now we all need to think about nutrition as one of our tools in our toolkit to stay healthy and keep our immunity going, and be as strong as possible. So hey, Miss Sonia. So with that, I just, I'm sad to have this come to an end for a little bit, but we'll be able to connect in other ways, and stay tuned for those. And yeah, and just as always, Gina is here to, wearing her social work hat. If anyone has anything that they want to talk to her either during or after, she's here and available if you're going through anything. Also, Olivia is also going to be here to kind of help manage the chat if there's questions. This is going to be, Portia is also going to be kind of helping manage the chat and the discussion, and be posing some questions to Maya. But we're definitely open to anyone and everyone who wants to bring any questions to the table. That's part of the discussion. So with that, I will just hand it over to Gina, and then Olivia, and then Maya, and Portia. Sorry.
Hey everybody, I hope y'all doing okay today. I'm driving, but I was determined to be with y'all. So I am gonna go off camera, and I'm gonna mute myself, and I will be home in about 10 minutes, and I'll get on a regular computer. But if you need me, to put it in the chat, and we will respond. All right.
Ooh. Thanks, Gina. And just briefly, I'll just say again, if anyone has questions while Maya and Portia are initially kind of going back and forth and chatting, you can put them in the chat box, and I'll make sure that they get asked. And then there'll be a Q&A period where where folks can actually ask with their own face. But if you have questions, just timely questions during the flow of Portia and Maya's initial conversation, feel free to drop them in that chat box, and I've got you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to Portia Dees and Maya Feller.
All right. Hey, Maya girl.
Hey, Portia, how are you? I said before when I saw you, I was like, everything, all of it. I love it.
Thank you. All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, how you do it, and why.
All right, that's a great question. It's so funny for me to start with like what I do because like I want to talk to you and be like, I want to know about you. So I will ask that though, but I will
Okay.
share a little bit about me. I'm a registered dietitian and I am based in Brooklyn. So pre-COVID, I did not work from home. I actually left my house and went out and I saw patients for medical nutrition therapy in a multi-use building, which in Fort Greene. So the Mark Morris Dance Center has a wellness center inside of it. And so, you know, we see different types of people. And so there was me, there was an osteopath, there were a couple of PTs, there was a Pilates teacher and a trainer. And so it was really a space for all types of bodies and abilities to come in for, you know, anything really, really wellness. And my specific focus is medical nutrition therapy, and I work in the area of metabolic conditions. So the risk reduction of developing them, and that's diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and then also the management of them through nutrition and lifestyle. Now, before I was in private practice, I actually was running a food and nutrition program in Brooklyn in the neighborhood of Flatbush. And it was funded by the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. And all of my patients within the program either had HIV or AIDS. And some of my patients had hepatitis C too. So that was my initial work population. And the community that, I mean, it's interesting. Someone said to me, you know, why did you take that first job? And I was like, I wanted to work with people who looked like me and people who could see themselves in me. And so my population, I mean, it could have been like my aunts, my uncles, you know what I mean? And basically my family.
Right.
So that's why I really wanted to work there. And in that work, we had group nutrition education, kind of the standard of like, you know, like a city program, right? So breakfast, lunch, dinner, group nutrition programs. We had a food pantry, and the fun part was that because in the early days when we were getting the program started, I had a lot of flexibility. And so we would do farm trips, you know, like all of this stuff. I really miss that. Like we all get on a bus together and go to some farm wherever and just, you know, have that farm experience and really get our hands like in the earth. And so that was really my first work experience. Your question, why do I do what I do? I think because I truly love food, I love nutrition, and I love people, you know? And I know that this sounds, it's so funny when I say it, Portia, but like, I love, actually, as I was about to say it, I had a thought. I do love all people, right? There's some people I don't, and you guys know who those folks are. But you know what I mean? And I really feel like, especially in the world of health and wellness, we don't see a lot of representations of anything other than, you know, this cisgender, slender, white woman or man. And so I just want to be there to be that alternative view.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because now that I am like taking, or that I'm doing this new diet and stuff that I'm on, or trying to, because I'm not perfect. But like when I go grocery shopping, I'm like, dang, I'm going white lady grocery shopping. Like, you know, like this is not how I'm supposed to, like, this is not what I'm used to. This food is not what I'm used to buying, you know, like, no offense, but like, sorry, I thought that was offensive, but no, like at Trader Joe's, and then like, you know, Black people usually buy like really unhealthy food. So yeah, you're right. Like, that's crazy that you say that.
I mean, you know, Portia, it's interesting because, and this is not exactly what we were going to talk about, but is a time really in the trajectory and history of this country where fast food became synonymous with Black food, right?
Mm-hmm.
and the food that, you know, us BIPOC folks consume. And I always bring that up because I think it's really important for us to understand that if we go kind of back in history, decades, we all ate food that came from the ground. And it's really around the systems that are currently in place that
Yeah.
have us eating what we're eating. And I have to give a nod and a point to socioeconomics as well,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the same thing for marginalized folks that we experience, right? So if we have a low income and we live in a neighborhood that's experiencing
Right.
food apartheid, then we are almost prescribed what we have to eat, and then it becomes
Mm-hmm.
our culture. And
Yep.
so I think it's so important for us to recognize that when we talk about health food, that depending on our cultural food ways, that could look totally different for everyone.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be quinoa, kale, you know what I mean, and grilled salmon. It can be, but it could also be like, you know, I have friends and family members who are Indian who do dals and all sorts of legumes with chapati and roti. And from my
Mm-hmm.
perspective as a clinician, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. um, okay. So the next question is, can you give us the lowdown on the gut and as it relates to nutrition and its connection with inflammation in the body overall?
Absolutely. So we have heard about the gut and the microbiome, and that's like a hot topic these days, right? Everyone's talking about gut health and what are you eating to support your gut health. And this is what I have said for years and what the research says, right? Is that the gut is the largest immune mediator in the body. And one of the things that we see with inflammation, any metabolic condition, or with infectious disease in the case of HIV, is that it actually changes how our gut interacts or works in terms of immunity throughout our body. Now, it's so funny, so I teach at NYU, and earlier today I was talking about to my students, well, I was actually recording a Zoom class because this is the world that we currently live in, right? So like I record the Zoom class and upload it to the cloud and then share it with the students because they're all over the world now. But I was talking about the early stages of life, right? So those first food, like literally when we're 6 months old, even at birth, and kind of how our microbiome and our gut health is actually kind of initiated in utero. So like when we're inside a pregnant person's belly, our gut health starts to colonize, right? Or become populated. And then when we are delivered and born, the influence of whether or not we are fed human milk or formula impacts with kind of the cells within our body and also has an impact on what's going on with our gut health. Whether or not we take antibiotics and all of that stuff from those early ages, right? And if we think about food, our first foods matter. And so for many of us, we're not even going back that far, but it's interesting to think of it in that like historical individual perspective. And the reason I bring up the first food is because the first foods are really an indicator for how the majority of us interact with food throughout our life. And we know that there are certain foods that are pro-inflammatory foods, meaning foods that make it so that our body is more likely to fall out of balance, right? And those tend to be the things that are much more processed. So added sugars, added salts, synthetic fats. And when I say a synthetic fat, I mean like, a hydrogenated fat that is usually found in a faster processed food or something that is shelf stable. Those packages, for me in my neighborhood, it's going into the bodega on the corner and it's all the foods that are in those first 3 racks, right? That are in a package. There's no refrigerator. It's right in the sun, and it looks exactly like it just came out of the, the processing facility. So those tend to be the pro-inflammatory foods. And what the pro-inflammatory foods do is that they kind of flip on a light switch in our body saying, you have permission to go haywire, right? And so what it does is it actually changes and we refer to this as like in the colonies, right? So you can have the healthy gut bacteria, and then you can also have the gut bacteria that creates dysfunction and systemic inflammation. And it changes the proportion of those actually within your body. And so what we start to see is this like uptick or increase in inflammation across the board when the majority of how we interact with food is with the pro-inflammatory foods. Now, on the flip side, if we say we want to have a lot access to or expose ourselves to the anti-inflammatory foods, those are the plants, right? So that's the things that are based in plants and that are whole and minimally processed with limited additives. And those foods actually act as protectors, right? Because they have the antioxidant capability, they have things called polyphenols. And what they do is think of them as like these helpers that kind of surround your cells so that they can better function. And it kind of dampens down the fire that inflammation is putting up. And so when we're thinking about, and I have to say that it's like that was a very simplified explanation, but the gut talks to our brain, the gut talks to our heart, you know what I mean? The gut talks to all of our organs. And so when we are able to create these kind of systems around food that are supportive of overall health, what we see is better diversity of those colonies in the gut and better outcomes. And I don't want to say good or bad, but we see improved outcomes with metabolic dysfunction, right? So that means like better blood sugar numbers or blood pressure that's within a healthy range or cholesterol that's within a healthy range. So really, and also, yeah, so really the gut is like kind of the signal that talks to our whole body.
Wow, that was, I learned a lot from that, from that little spiel that you did. Yeah, I know one of the reasons why I started, well, because of COVID too, COVID has me on my toes and wanting to like eat healthier and, build my immune system up. And, like you're saying, food is medicine. But another one of the reasons why like I really have been into this whole diet that I'm on is because, HIV and a lot of illnesses are inflammatory illnesses, like I guess meaning that like, because our body is fighting off like viruses or whatever that, our body is inflamed or whatever. So, and then I know I've struggled with a term called lipodystrophy. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. And I think that, like everything you were talking about just now, like that has helped me in fighting that. Like, I don't know if it's the actual virus that causes lipodystrophy or if it's the medicine that I've taken over the long period of time that I've been taking it. But, that throws my body off whack, like in my weight loss and my weight gain. So like everything you were saying really like made sense,
And with lipodystrophy, it can be a combination of how the virus is working within a person's body, viral load, as well as how the person's body interacts with the medication they're taking. So the other thing that I experience when I work with my patients, is that there were times when, just as you said, like intolerances would arise, right? Because there is a little bit of systemic inflammation, kind of just like this very low grade over time. So there would be days where someone would come in and say, do you know what? I couldn't tolerate an apple today. And we would say, because this is clinically, right? So we're face-to-face having this discussion. I would say, okay, so I'm thinking, what are the things that could be making you sensitive to that apple? All right, so maybe we could cook it to break down some of that protein that's in there, because all foods have protein. And maybe that's a little bit of what's, creating the intolerance. Maybe we peel it to see if some of the intolerance is coming from, that fibrous exterior. But it's exactly what you're saying. It's that kind of very low grade systemic inflammation that makes it so that the foods that we eat are incredibly important. And then also the lifestyle behaviors around it are important, right? So the anti-stress work, the breath work, the sleep, the rest, you know what I mean? Exposure to toxins, like all of that stuff. 100%, Portia, 100%.
Okay, and then so another question that I have is, how can diet choices be helpful during times of stress?
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. So when we're thinking about nourishing ourselves, the pro-inflammatory foods can add extra stress to your body, but there are also certain foods that kind of energize you, right? And so when we're thinking about de-stressing, right, because there's the mental component to de-stressing, but there's also the physical component to de-stressing. It's like adding in more of those fruits, vegetables, whole grains that really helps to bring down that inflammation. And the other thing too is keeping your blood sugars level, right? So many people that I work with, and I don't know, do you do this, Portia? I mean, I'm guilty of it. And I actually shouldn't say guilty, but I should say that I do it. Sometimes I'll work through lunch.
Yeah, I do that a lot.
Right? And what I find, interestingly enough, is that 2:30 or 3 o'clock will roll around. I can't tell you how many times a week this happens, and I'll be like, oh, I don't feel good. I'm like, I really don't feel good. I think I'm getting a cold. And I'm not getting a cold. My blood sugars are low. Exactly. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm the dietitian. What are you doing? But that's the thing, right? So it's like keeping your blood sugars level by making sure that you have, kind of consistent access to balanced meals. I want to know, Portia, actually about this 30-day that you did, what it is, the component, and kind of what spurred you in there, if you don't mind my asking.
So there's this guy that I follow. His name is Yada Awakening. He's like a new age Dr. Sebi. He's like very much into like a raw alkaline vegan diet. And so like I was saying, like ever since COVID hit us, I've been like really like scared because my immune system is already weakened. Like I haven't got my labs done since like February, just because all my appointments have been like over the phone, and I just have been scared to go into the hospital. But I am going to make an appointment to get my labs done. My CD4 count was like 3 something the last time. And I want to see if this diet is like really helping, like if my CD4 count is going to like boost up, but we'll see. Right. So yeah, like COVID has had me on my toes. Like I've been like taking elderberry syrup and like all kind of stuff. And then my friend actually told me about this guy Yada, and I started following him. And he has like this 31-day challenge where it incorporates fasting, but it's like a raw alkaline vegan diet. So there's days where you fast, which are usually on the weekend. And during the weekday, like for breakfast, you're not really eating anything, drinking water, alkaline water. And then my biggest meal is my lunch. And I do it anywhere from like 12 to 2. And like you said, I work through my lunch sometimes. So sometimes I'm late, but I'll eat like a raw vegan meal. So it's really just, it's no meat, no dairy, just a bunch of veggies, you know? And I've gotten good at like cooking and making my veggies taste good. And my mushrooms, I have substituted for meat, like, you know, like I know how to make it taste like meat. And then at night, I'll eat like a bunch of fruit, like a bunch of fruit. Like, for lunch, I can eat as many veggies as I want. It's veggies, you know, like, and it's actually not that bad. Like, I don't miss meat, like, or anything like that. On the weekends, I'll fast and I'll juice sometimes, or I'll just like absolute fast where I'm just drinking water all day. So that's what the diet consists of. And it's really strict. But I'm the type of person that I love a challenge or whatever. So like, and I've seen the best results I've ever seen in my life. Cause I've tried I tried the keto diet. I've tried like different kinds of diets, but this one, like really, like my body just feels a lot better and I've lost weight. Like none of them ever worked except this one. And I just feel better. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's important. I mean, thanks for sharing, by the way, I appreciate that. I always say when I work with people, it's important to find a pattern of nourishment that supports you and feels good and feels sustainable, right? And one that also supports the best health outcomes possible. You know, when I was working with my patients who had HIV, one of the things that we were really careful about saying was kind of reframing how we talked about ourselves and our bodies, right? So yes, technically, you know, according to like all the data, you know, someone who has HIV falls into the immune compromised, category. But guess what? Someone who's carrying a baby also falls into the immune compromised category. And guess what? Someone under the age of 5 and someone over the age of 65, right? But yet those populations don't take that on and say, I'm immune compromised. And so I like to remind everybody that health really exists on a spectrum, and that having HIV, you all know this already, you know what I mean, is a diagnosis, but not the identity, 100%.
Right.
And especially too, from like a nutrition and healing standpoint, I think it's important to you know what I mean, to recognize that there are ways that food can be supportive, right? And to also give yourself a significant amount of grace.
Right. Yeah. Since then, I've like kind of taken that like 30-day challenge or meal plan, whatever you want to call it, and I've like made it my own. Like I don't follow it all the way to the T anymore. Like, you know, like, so yeah. And then sometimes I'll still like eat meat or every once in a while, or incorporate dairy, just not like how I was doing every day. And yeah, what I've noticed is it's really helped with the way, because I know everybody doesn't experience lipodystrophy. Everybody living with HIV doesn't experience it the same, or have maybe never experienced it.
Right.
But it really, like, it's a big thing for me, and it's really curbed that. And so I'm like, yeah, I need to keep doing this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, and that's true, right? Because the other thing too, Portia, it's like how can you engage with food so that it's supportive of what makes you feel the best, right? And when anybody is experiencing a altered distribution, you know what I mean, of fat or adipose tissue in their body, I think, you know, folks on the outside don't really have a full understanding of what that means, because for many of us, we're tied into our physical identity, right? So I hear you 100%. And it's like you found something, and you also have found a way to say like, okay, from time to time, I eat meat, because the other thing that we know for people living with HIV is that protein is quite important. And you can absolutely have a vegetarian or a vegan diet, but you just have to make sure that you're getting the full amino acid profile, right? So that you're all of those proteins because the recommendations actually are a higher intake for protein.
Okay. I'm glad. Yeah, I think Maria was saying that the last time when I did my session. Yeah, we have to have a higher protein.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so this leads into my next question. When someone asks you, what can I do to eat a healthier diet? What would you say to them?
So in general, I say that the path of nourishment is different for everyone and that there is no one size that fits all. So if depending on who's sitting on the other side, of the table, or these days, the camera, the conversation is, tell me about your individual background. Tell me about your work life. Tell me about how often you're visiting your doctors or your care team, because all of that plays into how food can show up throughout your individual day. And so once we have that conversation, I then say, interestingly, what is the smallest thing that you can do that you feel like will make yourself this much healthier, right? And so for some people, it's adding in 1 serving of fruits per day. For some people, it's adding in 1 serving of vegetables per day. For some people, it's going for a walk around the block. So I think that it really varies by the person, and it's about adding something in that can really be sustained over time and that really helps you move toward your goal.
Okay. And then I had a question about fasting.
Mm-hmm.
What are your views on fasting as it pertains to like helping with inflammation and other types of like illnesses? And what are different types of ways of fasting or are alternatives, to fasting for those who can't fast, like in the traditional sense?
Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of things that I say when we enter into any discussion around fasting. And that is, if all of us were to wake up in the morning at 6 and eat breakfast at 7, it would culminate our last meal at 8, we would fast overnight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a type of fasting, right? So that you break your fast in the morning with that first meal at 7. Fasting in general is a challenge because of how, and I'm always careful when I have a discussion around fasting. It's a challenge because of how people enter in and out of the fast. And then also what happens in terms of the parameters for your metabolic health. So let me go back and explain that. So let's say someone says they want to engage in fasting, right? And they're like, I'm just going to not eat, from 4 p.m. until 11 the next morning, right? So that's their fasting window. What they're eating between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. is incredibly important. How are their energy levels, right? Are they able to sustain the work that they need to do? And I ask all of those questions because some people will fast, but then on the fed state, they're like having high fat, like saturated fats, like butter. And that we know, especially depending on the type of medication you're taking for HIV, can increase your lipid profile more than someone who's not taking that medication. And so I think that that's important to understand that in that fed state, what you're eating is incredibly important. Also, at 11 o'clock in the morning, are you so ravenous that you are then anything that's there, right? Because you fasted for so long. So I think that it really depends on the why are you fasting, what's happening with your individual metabolic profile. How's your blood pressure? How are your blood sugars? How are your lipid, your cholesterol numbers, right? How's your energy? How's your sleep? What's happening with your muscle composition, right? Are you losing lean body mass instead of, fat? Like what is happening if you're losing weight? Because I do think that fasting, also the other thing I will say is fasting is not at all indicated if there's been a history of disordered eating, body dysmorphia, or if your current health does not call for it. So I think that it has to be entered into from like an eyes wide open perspective.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing I'm like super, like I'm glad that we're having this discussion, like that I'm super interested in, like, because before COVID, pre-COVID, like my diet and health, my nutrition was not any a concern of mine at all. Like I didn't see a nutritionist, I didn't talk to a nutritionist or anything like that. Now I'm like super into it. So, but we're doing like, I haven't been to the doctor, I haven't, so it's like, I need to set up an appointment and start seeing one regularly. Like that will be new for me. And so, yeah, and I'm interested to see how all of this stuff that I'm doing is affecting my body. Like, I haven't got my labs or anything done yet. So like, yeah, you saying that makes.
But you know what, Portia, sorry to cut you off. I'll say this, and this is something that I say to anybody that I work with also, is when you go in and you have your labs done, it's important to understand that the labs are a measure. Yes, they are one measure, but your healthy behavior in this period of time may not be reflected in this first set of labs that you
Okay.
right? So that doesn't mean that it's not helping you or reducing systemic inflammation, because food and our body cycles take time to register.
Okay.
I always say to someone, let's say the person's 40, well, you have 35 and a half years of a specific type of food related behavior that you've been engaged in. And to expect to see, this immediate shift, sometimes it's really 6 months or 12 months before we see it expressed in the labs.
Right.
When patients who have diabetes or hypertension or cardiovascular disease and are not on medication, we usually say 3 to 4 months for a complete diet and lifestyle overhaul where you see that expressed in the labs. Now let's add on taking HIV medication, which also changes kind of how some metabolism happens within our body. Mm-hmm. We want to extend that period just a little bit. So don't feel terrible about not having been to the doctor right now. Like I'll tell you, I haven't been to the doctor either. I don't think many people have.
Yeah.
Because everything was closed. Right? Like that's also important to remember. When we see these people who are going to the doctor now and all, the access is completely different, right? Yeah. So remember that, and don't like beat yourself up for it, right? Get there, but don't beat yourself up for it.
That what you were just saying brought up another question, and then I'll open it up for anyone else who has questions, because I feel like I'm asking too many. But
no, that's great. Once you're done with that question, because we've got a few from the chat box, which is great, and then other folks may have some and want to come off on video and ask their questions. But yeah, go on ahead, and then I'll ask the questions from the chat box once you're done.
Okay. What are the specific labs and stuff that you look at as a nutritionist working with someone with HIV?
So I always look at, CD4, viral load. I always look at anything related to the lipids. So a complete blood count. I'll look at, as I said, all the lipid profiles, right? So LDL, HDL, VLDL, that's like the markers of fat within someone's blood that lets us know about cholesterol, triglycerides. I'll look at C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. I'll look at
Mhm.
all of the labs associated with blood sugars, right? So that we can look at someone's insulin. We can look also at their glucose. We'll look at A1C and the HbA, the hemoglobin A1C is a 3-month look back at what someone's blood sugars were doing over a period of time. Yes, so awesome. Someone just dropped in reading labs and blood chemistry. That's perfect. And then I usually also ask about blood pressure over time.
Mhm.
I rarely actually look at BMI. Health insurance asks us to use BMI, but I don't often use BMI because I don't think that it is valuable.
Okay.
Because you never know what's going on really with BMI. So it's like, okay, fine, your BMI is 30. I think what presents physically to me is much more important, right? How is adipose tissue versus muscle distributed? Where are there visible signs of wasting, if any?
Okay.
Right? Rather than just like looking at BMI, because let's say somebody's underweight, you'll see that they're underweight. I don't need, you know what I mean, the BMI to tell me that they have a BMI of 16. I can see this, right?
Yeah.
And I also ask questions about appetite, and as well as the quantity of food that's consumed, right? So the appetite
Okay.
goes with food. So when patients tell me, you know, I've been eating this much food, but now I'm eating 25% less because I have a loss of appetite, then there's another discussion that starts to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Y'all, this is amazing. It's so wonderful and enriching to witness y'all's conversation, and it's inspiring folks to ask questions in the chat box. There's one from Aisha, who I don't know if you saw, Portia. She was sort of addressing you directly and saying what's up and sort of responding to some of the
Oh,
things.
let me look. Yeah.
I know there's a lot of chat too. Yeah, but just know that it's there if you don't see it right away. But I eat about 1 time a day. It's never a full meal. I haven't had labs since November 2019. My reality facepalm is the emoji. Due in April, but the doctor's office was closed again, as y'all were saying. I've been working in school both full time. It's so hard to eat. How bad is that?
So first of all, I never say that there's anything bad about what happens with our life and food. When I work with people, the first thing that I say is we have a plan, and the best part of the plan is flexibility and knowing that life will happen, right? And that sometimes it doesn't go exactly how we say that you want it to be. So I would say if you're eating 1 meal a day, I'm glad you're eating 1 meal a day. The question is, what are the proportions of the meal? You know, what's on the plate? And then also, I mean, working full time and going to school full time, like let's just pause and take a moment and congratulate you for managing
Yeah.
all of that, because that's real, you know?
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, and kids, oh, yeah, listen, before this, I literally sent a message to my family and I was like, there's rice on the stove and I had made like some greens the other day, but I mean, it's like, you know, it's a lot to manage. So, yeah, so I recognize that. And I say, if you have the space and the facility to do some like bulk cooking on the weekend, you know, whatever you can cook in bulk, and it doesn't need to match, like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be like perfectly curated. It could be whatever suits your fancy. So if it's, you know, for me, it's always like some kind of vegetable rice or peas and rice, and then, you know, some kind of big greens, like 3 or 4 of them, some kind of roasted veggies. If you can do things like that, that you can heat up quickly so that you can have a second meal throughout the day, that can be helpful. And it's getting colder depending on where we are. But soups and stews, those last very well, and you can always make huge quantities for relatively low impact from a financial perspective. I mean, 1 butternut squash I made a pot of soup that was this big. So I would say, you know, yeah, you know, try to see if you can have some of that.
Excellent.
Did you see the follow-up to, well, just, this is Krista. Aisha did say in the chat that she does cook almost every day, but she just doesn't have an appetite.
So, I mean, usually what I say in that situation is that for an individual that's experiencing no appetite, the question is working with your care team and provider to figure out what the root cause of the no appetite is, whether or not there are things that are going on in terms of other beverages that are being consumed that are suppressing the appetite, what's happening with stress or, what's happening. So I think that that's actually a very important point, but it takes probably some individualized and like a specialized look for why there's no appetite.
Is there like a such thing? Because what I've noticed, like since I haven't been overeating like I used to do, I feel like my tummy has gotten smaller. Like I can't eat as much as I used to anymore. Like, is that a thing? Like maybe that's what's happening too,
And so in terms of hunger and satiety, simply because of the standard Western diet, many of us eat past being satiated, right?
Right.
So we're quite accustomed to feeling full or overly full. And when we reduce that, then we actually eat to satiety. And this is something that I teach, and I'm always horrified, especially as I grow up through the life cycle myself, that as we move through the life cycle, we actually don't need as much energy as we needed it in our first year of life. That's to say that our plates can become smaller, right? And sometimes that's okay. I'm not pushing restriction, I want to be clear, but
Yes.
sometimes it's okay if we eat less and we are satiated.
Good points. There was another question, and I think that also folks are coming on video and there may be other questions, but there was a follow-up or from earlier on about talking about 30-day challenges and things. Are there things someone needs to look out for following a 30-day challenge or cleanses?
Yeah, so the first thing I say with any 30-day challenge or cleanse is why. You know what I mean? What's your why behind entering into that 30-day challenge or cleanse, and what does it look like? Some of them remove huge food groups, and especially for people living with HIV, my concern and question is always, are you getting enough nutrients of the micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and the macronutrients, your protein, fats, and carbohydrates in whatever that 30-day fast or cleanse? And at the top of it, I also say, just as this question is asking, I want you to imagine your day 31. And what are the good parts of the 30-day that you can hold on to and take with you that are not restrictive? Because that's the other thing, right? So it's what are the good parts that you can hold on, take with you that are not restrictive and that you can replicate over time.
Well put. What's your day 31 look like? That's excellent. Now, let's see. I see a question in the chat. It's from Mel. Are you on video too? Do you want to just ask it or you want me to read it?
That's an incredible question, Mel.
Oh, Maya sees it. Cool.
I see it. It's such a good question. I actually happen to be working on a chapter for...
What's the question?
So the question is, can you talk about how body changes after menopause? As I've gained weight now and can't lose it like I used to. I always gain in the winter and lost in the summer. Also because I don't crave chocolate as much as I used to, so I'm eating less sugary, fatty foods. I mean, Mel, honestly, this question is like, it's such a good question. And the reason it's such a good question is because, especially for people who go through menopause, there is not often a discussion for us around perimenopause and the management of any metabolic conditions in that perimenopause or even before menopause. And the reason I go all the way back there is because the question actually speaks to what was happening at that time. And so what I can see here, and you just very slightly point to it, is a little bit of weight cycling, right? So there was a way where you gained in the winter and then lost in the summer. And especially for people who go through menopause, there is some research, and I don't know if this is your case, Mel, where the gain and lose, sometimes it results in positive energy balance, meaning you have the cycle of gaining and losing, but every year you're holding on to an additional half a pound or pound, right? And normally we don't talk about body weight, you know what I mean? Like, at least I don't talk about body weight as being problematic. The challenge is with menopause is that we lose some of the protective effects of estrogen, which help us in terms of cardiovascular disease, and it helps us in terms of managing metabolic conditions. Now, when we have more adipose tissue or fat, and then we begin to go through menopause and there are these hormonal shifts, that adipose tissue, it's not dormant or latent, right? Meaning that fat tissue can act as a hormone disruptor. Like, it can actually send signals throughout your body that they're like little gremlins, you know what I mean? And when we're in menopause or perimenopause, it becomes harder to lose weight. There's increased inflammation. And so you're absolutely right. It becomes much harder than you ever experienced before. And this is a time where it's like really thinking about how you engage in intentional physical activity, really thinking about the balance of the macronutrients, the protein, fats, and carbohydrates on your plate, really thinking about increasing your anti-inflammatory foods and decreasing, just as you've been doing, the sugary and fatty foods, because it will take, it does take longer to have a similar result as what you had before menopause. So perimenopause is a time when I tell my patients, this is your window, right? Like, this is absolutely your window, because there are, and it's referred to as body composition shifts. I mean,
that was a good question.
On and on and on. It was a very real and good question, Mel, like a excellent, excellent question.
Thank you. I think then that means that I've missed my window.
So your window's not fully missed, but what I will say is that it's almost like you want to go back into this is different than what I've said to anyone. It's like a routinized way of interacting with food, right? So, and usually with my patients who are going or in menopause, we actually talk about creating breakfast, lunch, and dinners that are routine and kind of planned out so that you see if it actually affects your weight and body composition, you know what I mean? Only because it is so much harder. And so there's a slight restriction, you know what I mean? But I try to be as liberal as possible within the restriction.
Y'all
Okay.
making me nervous to go through menopause. Oh my God.
No,
it's not fun, Portia. It's not fun at all. But it's really interesting because, you know, my mum used to diet a lot, so I've never dieted, and I have two daughters, and it's just not something that I really, you know, we didn't even have scales in my house for a long time because I just didn't want to have that obsessive, like, I've lost a pound of, you know, it wasn't something I wanted to encourage. But you can tell with your clothes, you know, you can't fit your jeans on, your bra's not big enough anymore, you know, so you have that as a measure. So I used to have like a wardrobe for the winter just because I'd eat more comfort food in the winter, more hot food, more cooked food. And then in the summer, naturally eat more salads, not like a diet, just that's what I wanted to eat. So it would always go up and down, but it's exactly what you're saying. It was just creeped, an extra pound, it's not going, and now it's gone.
But that's the other thing is, Mel and Portia, is that in women's health, we don't get good information, right? It's not prioritized for people to have these discussions with us from a younger age, right? So many of the people that I talk to about perimenopause and menopause are my age, and we're already in perimenopause, you know? And the thing is that people don't realize that perimenopause can start when you're 40, and it's not a scary thing, but it's simply a hormonal shift, and it's not a discussion, right? Like, we just don't talk about it.
I think it's also like I have my daughter, so she is very active and she's a vegetarian, so she has a healthy diet. But you know, just this discussion of she cannot achieve the same level of fitness on some days as she can on other days, just because of her cycle, and sort of getting an understanding of that and what you want to eat sometimes as well, and not beating yourself up about that, I think is something that young people aren't taught as well.
Heck yeah, when I go through my lady time, that's what I call it, man, like that's when I'm comfort eating like crazy, like the diet is out the window. I'm like emotional eating. But that's when I struggle the most.
I mean, sometimes I have to tell my students, you know, that the hormonal shifts that the body experiences really does impact our cravings. And I feel like once we know that too, then we can also take some of the like demonization away from it, right? Because there's a thing, right, Portia? Like, you know, from time to time, I'm a savory eater. Like, I love a Dorito. Listen, I love it. But, you know, the first time I had a Dorito, like recently, was like after a long time, but it was just because I wanted it. And I didn't feel bad. I felt great. Let me tell you, I was like, this is excellent.
I think Gina said something. She had a question.
Yeah, go for it, Ms. Gina.
Yes. So years ago, I'm a woman living with HIV for 26 years. So years ago, going to the dietitian at the clinic, they stopped doing BMI tests on Black women. And they explained to us that they weren't doing it because we were going to always skew heavier, to have a higher BMI. And I was wondering, do you know why that is? Why is it Black women, no matter what size we are, when we get that BMI test done, it kind of skews us to be a little, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I have so much that I want to say on that topic, and I'm going to find a really positive way to have this discussion. So there are parts of that are true, that Black women can have a higher BMI in comparison to our white counterparts, simply because of body composition and lean body mass. Now that shifts as we move around the globe, because when we're thinking about ethnicity and makeup in terms of around the globe, we see that there are different types of body composition that we can have, right? And so I, as a clinician, and especially as a Black dietitian, would be very careful in a community setting or in a clinical setting across the board to say, we don't do this because Black women will always have X, because that might not be the case. What I would say is BMI is not always valuable, regardless of race or ethnicity. And we all know race is a social construct, so it's based on whatever the census says, right? Is that so that it may or may not be valuable. But rather what I would do, Miss Gina, is I would actually say, like, all right, what is the waist circumference? What does the body composition look like? What are the labs? I would want to know about, what you're eating, what's the composition of your foods, because I think that that's more of a valuable indicator of your overall health. You know what I mean? Than simply saying, oh, Black women, you know, your BMI is always going to be higher, so we're not going to check you. You see, this is the challenge with the systems that are in place, is that, and I know that we're running over, and I'm gonna, you know, is that we often are not part of research studies and the data, and especially those of us living with infectious disease or chronic illness. The guidelines are not made for us or by us, you know. So it's like, yeah, that you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Well, you know, they should have did it back then, because now it will be a mess because I am menopausal, and like you, Mel, I have gained all this weight and I don't know what to do with it. But back then I was slim and trim, and I was like, I wanted to know. But, yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, good questions. And regarding time, Maya, do you have a couple more minutes? And Portia, can we go a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I can do a couple more minutes.
Okay. And apologies if obviously we want to respect folks' time if people do need to step off, but we'll just go just a few more minutes. And let's see, are there any other questions? Folks want to come off mute?
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, greetings from Nigeria.
Greetings.
Hi, Jose.
Hi, Portia. It's good to see you again. Actually, for me, this is a very interesting topic for me as an individual. And I've noticed in the past couple of months, I've actually lose a lot of weight. And I was weighing like 98 kg earlier this year.
Yeah.
And right now I'm weighing like 80, 83, 84. And it started when my ARVs was changed. They placed me on this new cocktail now. And actually I spoke with the physician who said it's not the ARV. So, and I eat regularly, I do eat. And I know in Africa, mostly here in Nigeria, most of our food here is carbohydrate.
Yes.
So you try to balance it up by eating some vegetables, which you have to either cook in your soup. And eating fruit is not an every other day thing for us here, except you can afford it. And eating vegetables like salad is not every other day thing here. So you eat more of carbohydrate food. In the house, you can only, the protein food you can find in the house is beans.
Yes.
Yeah, mostly, most homes have beans. But we do more of rice, gari, cassava eating, and all whatnot. But for me, I just discover I'm just losing weight. All my dresses are, I'm sagging. In fact, I have to get a tailor to just amend them for me of recent. And I can't really pin why that is like that. But one thing I also observe is that my last meal for the day is like 5 o'clock, 5 p.m. So once I take any swallow, every meal, I'm done for the day. So and my breakfast is like maybe 9, 10, because I take my meds by 10. So I do my breakfast around that period. So maybe that's why I'm losing this weight, but people say you are looking healthy. But I feel healthy anyway.
I wish I had that problem, Bose.
I mean, I would say, of course, without looking at your labs, you know, and if your primary care provider is not concerned about the rate of weight loss, then that's a good indicator. As your dietitian, in general, let me quickly do the math. 98 kilograms to what you said?
80 something.
84.
84. And how tall are you?
What do you say? 5.7.
Okay.
5.7.
5'7"? Okay.
You're taller than me, Jose, and
84 kilograms?
I'm taller than you.
Yeah.
And I'm tall for a lady.
So I would say, you know, based on, like, of course, I don't have your lab, so like I can't make a proper determination, but I would say if your primary care provider is not concerned about the weight loss or the rate of weight loss, that, yeah, you know, that I think I would watch it for the next, you know, 4 to 6 weeks. If you continue to lose at that weight unintentionally, because unintentional weight loss is always one of the challenges, you know, and then you follow up with your provider.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
So what I'm thinking is there are 2 more questions. Does that sound okay? There's one about vitamins, and then Masanya has a question.
Sure, yeah, questions is great.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Masanya, do you want to ask
Yes,
your
I
question?
said thank you. Did I say thank you?
Sure.
I said thank you.
Uh-oh, sorry. Okay, so my question is, I wanted to ask about diet and lymph nodes. I have a couple of peers that are on the call now and off of the call, and including myself, but you know, I realized like I've been studying a little bit about the lymphatic system, but what information do you, or what research do you have, knowledge that you have around diet and lymph nodes? Because I know that they can hurt, they can be inflamed, but we don't really get, we hear about it. We know that it's something that can be heavily impacted by the virus, but we're not really taught much about it.
So, so the first thing that I would say, and this is a really good question, is that it really depends on where you're doing your research, right? So like for anyone that's reading anything, I always say you should go to PubMed or Medline or Ovid, because that's where the scientific studies are. And it's important, especially when we're talking about the lymphatic system that can be impacted by hormonal shifts as well as medication, that, you know what I mean, there's a bigger look. And so usually what I say to someone is that this is where I would bring an endocrinologist in, right, to really have an individual look. And I would be very careful about using anecdotal or other people's experiences, right? Or taking that in. And I would really only go to the journals, and I would work 100% with an endocrinologist around, you know, the lymphatic system. And it's because it's so individualized, and it really is like, there can be significant shifts in terms of an individual's hormones. And so that's where I would absolutely be doing my research. Of course, you know, there are a lot of complementary and alternative providers who talk about like dry brushing and, you know, oil pulling and things like that, or using charcoal.
What is that?
These are some techniques that people use to like pull toxins from the body, but it's complicated because it's mostly based in anecdote and individual experience, and there's not a lot of scientific evidence. And I want to be careful in that because I actually value people's individual experience, right? And I teach other providers to do the same. But you know what I mean? I say that to say that sometimes we can get pulled into an area that's not sound and not applicable to us.
Right.
Well, it's good to know that there are some anecdotal, that you call it anecdotal, but I was going to say techniques and other ways that we can approach it. But for me personally, I've been really insecure. I had a heart attack last year, and with the medications that they put me on from the heart attack, is not from my eating habits. It's not from, it's just one of those things that can just happen. So what I found is I'm experiencing some things that's happening around my lymphatic system, and wasn't paying attention much to it until I started talking to my peers, and they're like, yeah, this is something I go through often, but not in the extremity that I have going on. So it's funny because I went to my HIV specialist and I pretty much demanded that I could see an endocrinologist, because I said, this may be hormonal, and I know I've had issues with my thyroid, but the fact that you as a dietitian have mentioned endocrinologists, I wasn't even thinking strongly like that, but I was very, like, I was advocating really hard to have one. Like, my doctor raised her eyebrow at me, like, what do you know about an endocrinologist? And I've had a thyroid issue in the past, but not knowing that HIV, or not thinking that HIV and your lymphatic system go hand in hand with your diet.
Right.
I hadn't considered that. So thank you for mentioning that.
Of course, good for you. But that's the other thing too. I'll tell you, I talked to this woman who's the head of the National Black Doula Association. This is a different topic, but I interviewed her for a story on Black women. And one of the things that she said to me was, we have to teach our patients to advocate for themselves, right? Providers like to look at us and say, what do you know about? And what you know is your story, and you live in your body. So you're actually walking in with a ton of evidence. You know what I'm saying? So like, good for you for advocating, and continue to advocate. I would also say too, don't discount some alternative modalities like massage and acupuncture. And those tend to be covered under insurance. And in terms of the lymphatic system, those can significantly help with drainage. And there is evidence there, right? So use all the tools that you have, available to yourself, and, use the benefits that are there.
Before we just have this conversation right now, I always used to think, because my lymph nodes, like under my neck, swell up like at least like 5-6 times during the year. And I always used to think like it's just because I'm starting to get sick. Like I must be starting to get sick. So I'll drink some juice with like ginger or like lemon or apple cider vinegar and stuff like that, like not knowing what you guys are talking about, that it could be hormonal or like, thank you guys for this conversation.
Excellent. There was one more broad question about vitamins and dietary supplements. The asker says, I hear so many mixed messages. Any advice on this?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I will say this, as someone who has been contracted previously, not any longer, by a supplement company, you know what I mean? Like I had a very small contract with a supplement company. And so I always disclose that when I talk about supplements, because clearly I believe that there is a place for supplements. I think that broad spectrum multivitamin supplements can bridge a gap when people are not engaged in a regular and consistent intake of a well-balanced diet. There are places and times when it is absolutely not indicated with certain treatments, right? So usually with my patients, what we do is we take a look at your individual labs, your overall pattern of nourishment, your physical activity levels, and your health before we start to think about supplementation, because it really does vary, right? So sometimes we'll take a multivitamin and our urine will be like fluorescent and we're like, I am doing the best thing possible for my body. The truth is that your cells have taken up what it needs and the rest is being spilled out. So you just have very expensive urine. So, I say all of that to say that, needs to be individualized. There is no one size fits all. Work with a qualified healthcare provider and really look for third-party certifications if you're going to supplement.
Well, I want to thank you so much. And this has been so enlightening and, amazing, and my brain's clicking to figure out ways that we can work together in the future and continue these conversations. So So yeah, so I don't know if anyone else who just wants to come on camera and say goodbye, but thank you, and I'll let the rest of you all also say something. But just from us, all of us at the Well Project, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Portia, too, for moderating.
Portia,
Thank you.
Everybody have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Later.
Thanks, everybody.
Portia, Maya, you're brilliant.
Moderator, yeah,
Bye.
thank
So
you.
good to see you after
All
so
right.
long. Take
Great
it.
job. Bye.